So, Denise, it's April 2020. You're taking on a new role, right? So, as the pandemic is just beginning to kick into full force, you're coming into a new role. What was that like for you? Two major things happening, not to mention life in general, right? Two major things happening at the same time.
I think it didn't hit me until probably a handful of months later, the sort of moment that I was in. I think we made the decision to close our offices in March. People went home. We kind of thought we would see each other maybe in 2 to 3 weeks. And during the course of that, I had an opportunity to step into a new role. And I think everything was happening so quickly that it didn't really catch up to me until a little bit later when I took a step back and I said, okay, well, why does this feel so hard? I mean, I have done new things in our organization multiple times. I've had multiple careers at Meraki. And yeah, the beginning always starts a little bit, but this one really felt different. And I found myself trying to unpack why it felt so hard. And I think you have sort of the new role, new team, and I have been a new way of leading. I have been pretty fortunate in my past roles, at least for me, to show up and someone saying, hey, there's nothing here, build me something. And I'd be like, yeah, great, awesome. And I'd go and I'd find some fellow builders and we'd do this thing together. So then I was inheriting a whole team that I didn't hire, I didn't grow. And as crazy as that might seem, especially 20 years into management, that was new. And we were sitting in a moment in corporate America in the subsequent months where we were talking about equity. We were really talking about racism in the workplace. We were having all of these conversations that in my lifetime at work were always things that were not conversations that you had in the office, not in the way that we were having them.
Right.
And then there was that. And as a person of color and a member of a group of folks on multiple dimensions that are underrepresented, especially at sort of the higher levels of leadership, I was sitting in these conversations with the weight of that moment as a part of this experience. So when I look back at March, April, May, June, of 2020, it's no surprise that it felt hard, right? Like there were just a lot of parts of my life colliding into a new set of responsibilities at work, and we still had to get work done. And my role was also hard in this moment because it's I have supply chain responsibilities and all of those things. So in retrospect, I am proud of my level of resilience, really, in that moment, in ways that I don't think I have been as proud of myself before, because it really took a lot of effort just to show up and be the type of leader that I think I want to be in a moment that felt really raw and exposing to me personally.
Some words are coming up for me, and I'd love to see what resonates. Like trial by fire, right? It's coming up for me. Like ignorance is bliss. Maybe sometimes you're moving so fast, you don't have time to think about things. You just have to go from one thing to another. It's hard. I'm maybe making an assumption here. You might have had some plans you were coming in with, right? You had some ideas and some plans, and now they're out the window. Am I hitting on some themes? Is any of this resonate? Yeah.
I mean, I think when I stepped into the role, I think that there are some things that I wanted to kind of do differently in the organization. And I, got to bring parts of my old job as the chief of staff into the role, and got an opportunity to start to combine some of that work with the work that was happening in the operations team. So yeah, I had some ideas around like, okay, how are we going to help fuel the growth of Meraki? Like, how are we going to help, maybe insert little droplets of oil into the way that we've been working to try to take the friction out that, ends up happening when you're growing something at the size that we are, at the pace that we are, right? So it's like, I have all these ideas on maybe how we can operate more efficiently, how we can put systems and processes in place to drive more alignment in the organization. So yes, I had a ton of ideas. But I also wanted to start slowly. I wanted to listen, kind of hear what felt important to others. I wanted to get to know my leadership team, right? So they're not folks that were unknown to me, having worked in the organization for a long time. But we had different relationships. It wasn't sort of like, oh, I'm your leader relationship. And so we had to sit in those relationships for a while and build trust and have dialogue and all of that good stuff. I had some ideas, but I also, by virtue of having been a person that has had to show up and start afresh many times, I knew that sort of starting a little bit slowly was going to be the right thing for me. And so the upending of even the slow start was there, because we had to make all of these decisions really quickly, like, when do we or do we not come back to the office? What do we do with all the services that we have in the office that are no longer going to be needed? And we didn't know how long we were going to need them for. We had to think about the safety of folks that had to come in order for our business to continue to operate. And then on the sort of social justice side, we had to kind of say, like, how are we going to support employees in this moment where we're trying to have these conversations? Like, how do you create not only dialogue, but how do you inspire movement and commitment that doesn't go away when it's not as top of mind in the news and things like that, right? And then we had like a supply chain that was basically like beginning to shut down. And then how do you negotiate the relationships that you've had with suppliers for a very long time in a growing business when, the spigots go off and they go off really quickly? So this desire to kind of step into it slowly and to listen and to move, like, I couldn't have that. Yeah. Because that's not what the moment called for. It called for a lot of decisions. It called for those decisions quickly. And we were navigating a lot of territory that nobody really knew how to do. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So it felt that dynamic just felt like all of the, the books that you read around, the first 90 days and all of that good stuff. It felt like
10 days. Let's just go with the first 10 days, right? Like, yeah.
It was like, okay, well, that would have been a really great game plan that I can't really execute on right now. So I did think that, like, that was the thing that felt even harder, is that there's a way that I think, being a person that has had to wear different hats, like, there's a way that I approach it that I couldn't even lean on for myself. And we had to just kind of get in there, make the best decisions that we could based on the information that we had, and continue to sort of revisit where we were as a business and continue to just flow with it and pivot and change when we had to. But the one good thing that I think I continue to come back to is whatever critiques people may have of where they work, and I surely have some of where I work. I think the thing that I continue to be most proud about at working at Cisco is, like, we have a deep care for the people that work in our organization and for our suppliers and for our customers. It really guides the way that we make those decisions. So even in all of that uncertainty, I kind of always knew that, like, the fundamental principles had to be around, what's going to be good for our customers, what's going to be good for our people. And then we'd make those decisions and, take sort of the business repercussions that go along with that. Because at the end of the day, if you focus on those two things, you will have success over time, even if in a moment, you have to make some business decisions that feel challenging.
Yes.
if you take them as just a moment in time. So I do think that like, even in all of that uncertainty we're lucky enough, or at least I'm lucky enough to work at a place where there are some North Stars that never change.
I love that because Cisco has a reputation for people first. I mean, it's well known that Cisco has that reputation. People appreciate it. They relish in it, even in helping people create interesting careers within Cisco. We've had a number of conversations where people said, the role was created for me, right? I got to do something interesting. Once the adrenaline wore off, March, April, May, June, and we all of us started to develop some routines, and everything wasn't so new anymore. Was there, I liken it a little bit to an earthquake, like an earthquake hit corporate America in some ways. Were there some interesting possibilities that you hadn't thought about that emerged once you had an opportunity to survey the landscape and say, you know what, there's some interesting things we can now do, culturally, business, whatnot?
I mean, I think one of the first things at Meraki, we were definitely an in-office, in-person culture.
Yeah.
And this idea that we would work together and not share space together was new to us. And I think it opened up some possibilities for us on like how we think about talent and talent management, how we think about roles and how we scope them, how we think about, meeting employees where they want to live or spend their time or how they want to structure their days. Like it really opened up a talent market for us that we hadn't had before. Like I'm a firm believer that genius knows no zip code, but the way that we had constructed our talent strategies up until then, if you wanted to work for us, there were just zip codes that you needed to be willing to work from. And that was an opportunity for us. It was an opportunity to really rethink what the employee experience is like. What does inclusion really look like? How can we be more inclusive because we are distributed? It really drove some focus on like this idea of working remotely or working in your own space. It wasn't all downside to all people, right? You have, neurodiverse individuals and, just all of these different levels of comfort in this thing that we had said was the way that we should be working. And now that we opened that up, we could hear feedback from employees that said, hey, you know what, this actually works better for me. Being in this space with others is distracting for the deep work that I have to do, and being able to like have more flexibility to create an environment that works better for me every day helps me actually get to better outcomes for our team and our business. So there was an opportunity to rethink what it meant to be a part of our community. And there was an opportunity to rethink, what does it mean to create community? And this is an experience that our sellers have been having a long time. And we have field sellers. They're not in an office all the time sharing space with each other. And it was an opportunity to kind of learn around how were we making Meraki for those folks? And how do we kind of bring that into the organization more broadly? I think we now have solutions and approaches to building community that are not necessarily only rooted in people sharing space together. So a real opportunity to rethink our talent strategy, a real opportunity to really broaden, what we had thought around the world of inclusion, and an opportunity to really think about community and how do you continue to demonstrate values? How do you continue to build a sense of connection when there are a lot more variables because people could be working in different ways. So there's an opportunity on the talent side of it. I think from the business perspective, we at Cisco have been always selling solutions that allow folks to work anywhere, right? But being able to really step in with our customers and enable that, it really opened up kind of even how we thought about our portfolio, how we thought about the use cases. How do we really narrow in on these use cases around hybrid work? How do we make sure that we can show up as an organization with all the solutions that we have, from networking to security to collaboration? We could show up and say, hey, here's a way that we can help you with all those workers that just went home, or here's a way that we can help you navigate, the complexities of the pandemic, hospitals using some of our equipment to do telemedicine, really having different uses for our IoT solutions, like our smart cameras. Like, how do you actually start to use that to help with traffic management and things like that in spaces, right? So lots of opportunities to redefine and to show up as a really great technology partner to our customers by virtue of having to think about work differently for ourselves and then our customers. It allowed us to rethink, and it forced a rethink. And I think in a really fast moving organization, forcing fundamental rethinks is hard.
Right.
And so, you're just like, okay, the plane, it's flying. I'm just kind of building as I'm going.
Yeah.
And this really did cause a pause because it had to. And I think we come out of it with better ideas around all of those things.
I love where you're going with that. One of the themes that as you're talking about partnerships and rethinking your relationships internally and externally with, internal constituents, external constituents, partners, teammates, is this notion of, it's come up several times, of navigating where does work begin and end now? Because there were some people, right? They love to go driving to work and driving home from work. That was great. They processed in, they processed out. They showed up in different states. Like, I'm now at home, now I'm at the office. Some people love the full exposure of the virtual world. Some people are still trying to navigate their privacy. And so has that been, those type of conversations or themes hit you and your organization at all?
Yeah, it really hits home personally for me.
Okay.
I come from an experience where, work is work and then home is home. And those two places are very different. And who I am in those two places are really different, right? Like, I am, although most people would not know it, I am, I'm an immigrant, right? Like, I come from a place that's not this place, right? And I have a family and a cultural experience that reflects that. I don't necessarily bring, I had always sort of drawn a line around, like, well, how much of that do you bring to the workplace, right? Yeah. And I think I say, people ask me, like, how do you feel about bringing yourself to work? And my answer has always been, you bring as much of yourself as it serves you at work, right? Like, that has been my philosophy. Like, not all of it, because it always felt to me that some of it just could not be understood or consumed in the workplace in a way that would serve me, right?
Yeah.
And I know that there are other people that have experiences in their family lives or whatever, where, there was just a hesitance around, if I bring that to the work, does that change what I'm able to do? Does that change how people perceive me or my capabilities or my competence, however, whatever people feel like that would translate to them. So it was really hard as a person who really saw work as work and home as home. Right. Enter into a place where that was fully blurred, right? Like, my children are coming in and out, and my husband, and, I live very close to my parents. And so they may be popping in, navigating a pandemic where I felt like I couldn't just be fully present in work, right? Because there's some kids doing some learning at home, and I gotta go over there and make sure things are going okay. And
you're hot tutor now, right? I mean,
exactly.
Tutor, right? Yeah.
Right. And I have, when this thing started, I had parents that I was like, oh, you can't go to the grocery store and you can't do all of those things. Like, I've got to go do those things for you and kind of manage for your lives, so that way you can stay safe and all of this stuff. And so all of that then becomes a part of my ability to show up at work, do my work. And there was no hiding it. Like, I couldn't be like, oh, I have no children here because they're like, hey, I had to pause
They're coming in and out, right? Yeah.
because my 7-year-old was straight up having a full-on meltdown in the middle of the interview. And he shows up at the door and there's nothing I can do. I can't put it on mute. I just had to say to the person, I'm going to need a minute. And I turned off the camera and I turned off the audio and I dealt with the situation. And then I came back on camera and we started again. But like, I stepped out of that interview being like, is this person going to take this job if they are offered this job? Yeah. Like my immediate thought was like, what is this going to say on Glassdoor? This woman is crazy. Like her kids are crazy.
Totally. It brings up some fear. It sounds like triggers a little bit, right? It's a little triggering, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I felt like all of the ways that I had been compartmentalizing my life and leaving some of it outside the door of work, I couldn't do that anymore. Yeah. So that was like one piece of it, like all the management that I have been doing about my life, like was on full display for folks to see. And then the second part of it was like, there was an ask from an organization or from the world. I shouldn't say from the organization, but from the world, where the world was beginning to redefine like, what does good leadership look like? Yeah. And it's not like it's a new concept. I mean, Brene Brown's been out there having a conversation about vulnerability with leaders for a very long time. But it still felt like a choice, right? Like you could step into that to lead in that way. And you could toe into it. Like you could kind of dip your toe and kind of make your way through. But then we were sitting in a pandemic where it was like, everyone was so raw that a toe-in approach to vulnerability as a leader wasn't going to work anymore, right? Yeah. I couldn't show up in a way that didn't bring like, this is hard for me too, because in the absence of that vulnerability was not sort of creating a trusting relationship with the people that I was working with. And if you're an intensely private person like me, the idea of having to not only put your whole life on display, but then also show up in a way that like, where you feel somewhat compelled to be like, yeah, this is a whole hot mess for me too. It really sort of it was rewriting kind of how I had presented myself at work. It was rewriting like what I thought leadership should look like at work, at least for me. It was rewriting these norms, I think, that like people who are underrepresented in these positions of power have had for a very long time, where there is a life that's with me and my home and my family and my friends. And then there is a life that is at work and there's code switching and all of that stuff. And it doesn't mix. And so, it was like, it wasn't just blurring, like you can now see into my house, but it was almost like you're now seeing into me. And I think that level of exposure, I think it was hard for me. It was hard. For other people, maybe it felt like full integration and it could happen. But for me, that integration was like, whoa, feeling like super exposing. So blending life and work was more than I'm not turning, it's 6:00 and I should put my computer down. It was a little bit by like, it's 6:00 and how much more have people learned about me in the last 8 hours? Yeah. Right. So
did that, 2 questions for you. Did that, I might not be using the right language here. Did you manage to find a new normal, such a cliche term, but did you, and second question is, did you find energy or were you able to recharge in the past when you had that separation? Was that like, okay, this is work, this is home, I'm recharging, going back to work, with those boundaries now very amorphous, very, very fluid. How did you recharge? How did you find yourself? So are those making sense? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm still figuring out how this is going to work, right? For me.
Honest. Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's a new normal. it's, I feel like I'm normalizing to what feels right for me.
Yeah.
And someone said to me the other day, well, you just come off as more authentic. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting stop and pause and think about. And I think some of that is just like, I'm just doing less editing. And when you do less editing, maybe you are more authentic, because like it is really just coming from a place where I'm trying to stop the constructing of a persona, or I'm trying to stop the constructing of like, how I present myself, or how I just am like, I don't have the emotional energy for all of that compartmentalizing anymore, because there's just too much chaos around. So I got to like use that energy to manage the chaos. And maybe a benefit of that has been, people perceiving that it is just what it is. Like, I am who I am.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. So I don't know. And so your second question around recharging, I think I've had to find other ways to recharge, and as opposed to sort of being like, oh, I just turn it off and then I can be at home or whatever. I think what I have now tried to norm on is this idea of like full focus in this one thing that I'm doing at any given time. And that served to be a bit more energizing to me in the space where I felt like I was just spreading all of my attention or all of my energy too deeply, right? So I think one of the things that what I've been trying to do is, like if I'm in the car with my kids, like I know that like sometimes I'm going to have to be on a meeting. Like it just is what it is. Like that was my life before. But I try not to do that as much as I used to, right? Like I just was like, we drive in the morning and we talk about things and we have conversations that we just didn't used to have anymore. Because I think like one of the things that has come out of the pandemic is I have spent much more time at home, and I can pick up sometimes, I can drop off sometimes, much more than I used to be able to, because I'm not factoring in a commute. And I've tried to make those moments just feel like richer to me and to the kids, because now I think we have a very different dynamic and relationship by virtue of just having spent more time, right? Yeah. So there's that. That feels really energizing to me. I feel like when I'm being a mom, I'm actually more being a mom. Like we can just have the time, we can be a bit more focused. And my kids also get to see me at work, which is something that's really interesting when you think about it. That's sometimes energizing. Like your kids are beginning to see you as like a full person. Like they see me as a leader. They, sometimes my little son sits in here while I'm doing a town hall or something, and he'll just sit on the floor and he's coloring. But afterwards he'll say, oh, well, those are a lot of people on the call, or something like that. Like he, and sometimes that's energizing to be seen as a full person to your own children.
Imagine, yeah.
Yeah, right. And I also think that it just has heightened the time that I have away from work, like the time with my friends. I get so much more energy out of those times. I think because I recognize just how important it is to be in spaces where, the folks that are gathered there are on your support team or on your cheerleading squad or whatever. Just driving a bit more intention to the moments to whatever I'm doing in the moment that I'm doing it. That that has become more of a normal to me than what it used to be. So yeah, it hasn't all been bad, this sort of exposure and increased level of vulnerability or whatever, because I think it's also allowed depth to the relationships that I already had, right? So there is a silver lining somewhere in there.
I love that. And I love it because it also gives insight to other people who are dealing with the same things, right? I think that's a voice that is now increasing a little bit of folks that are private and trying to navigate this and creating that space for them to do so successfully and to do so in their own way. And I think that's super important. Any final words of wisdom right now for leaders who are, anything that comes to mind for you that you've learned the last 2 years on, courageous decision, leadership? Is there any parting gems that you just want to put out there and say, hey, here's some things I picked up that might help you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe some folks discovered this earlier than I have, so I don't know if it's a parting gem, but like there is just a humanity in leading that is worth trying to explore, maybe even in that first leadership job, around just acknowledging it and exploring it as a leader from the first day that you're asked to do it, whether formally, like leading a team, or informally, like leading an initiative, leading change, or whatever you're being asked to do as an organization. In an organization is to really think about the humanity of leadership. There's an inherent need for connection. There's an inherent need for inspiration. There's an inherent need for vision, followed by execution. But at the end of the day, for the most part, it's still humans, and trying to get humans excited or motivated or energized to hopefully do something of consequence. It feels important to kind of root all of that in the fundamental realization that part of that equation is around not only recognizing others' humanity, but recognizing your own. And not to sound too Zen crazy lady, but I do think that sometimes we lose our way as leaders in that we think it's the last T crossed on the plan and all that stuff. That stuff has to be right.
Right.
But the ability to get a group of people energized around whatever the plan is starts with the group of people. And how are you as a leader connecting in meaningful ways with that group of people? How are you creating an environment where folks are able to connect with each other and connect with the direction? How are you taking a moment to really think about, humans and what they need in order to move them towards work or a direction? It has been, I think, the thing that has been on display for the last couple of years as the world has tried to deal with all of this. It's a human endeavor, doing things. And until we get rid of all the humans and it's just being orchestrated by machine learning and AI, humanity is still required fundamentally as a leadership act. And the recognition both ways of that humanity is important. So.